Robyn, tell us about you. The community knows you. Everybody knows you. You're an incredible leader in this community. And by the way, thank you for everything you've done.
Oh, thanks.
For the state and for the startup and tech community and beyond here in Utah. But tell us, who's Robyn?
Oh my gosh. I'm like, where do I begin? Well, for those that don't know, let's start there.
Yeah.
So I'm actually originally from Toronto, Canada. So good old Canuck here. And then further with like my background, I am Jamaican and also like Eastern European, Jewish. And I always joke with people that Drake is my brother from another mother because he's also from Toronto and he's also Black Jewish like me. So you know what? Maybe there's some relation way back there. And I've had the privilege to live in 2 continents, 3 countries, and 8 cities over the course of 25 years. So everywhere from Toronto, Montreal, to Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, even Sao Paulo, Brazil for some time. Yep. And that was really an incredible experience. So that just brings a wealth of knowledge and experience and culture that, you really can't get from staying put, right? In one spot.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And, I've had just a really interesting career. Everyone thinks that you have that like standard trajectory, right? You go to school and you graduate, with whatever your major is, you go right into that field. Yeah. That's not me. Yeah. I'm an English lit major and proud of it. Let's say,
you should be proud of that.
Yeah. Liberal arts major here.
Yeah.
But I've had the opportunity to be a makeup artist. I've had the opportunity to do marketing and operations and events and so much, just cool stuff that if I had stayed in one place, I don't think I would have had that experience because then I can bring all of that to whatever I'm doing.
Right.
I would say in the last probably 15 years, it's been more focused, but with kind of 2 aspects to my career. One is where I've been moonlighting in the space of now we call it DEI, but back then, it was women's advocacy, women's empowerment, and we still call it that, but we just have now realized that that's a part of a company's focus of like diversity, equity, inclusion, and what that means. And so everywhere I've ever lived for the last 15 years, I have been heavily involved in the startup entrepreneurship, general business tech space, to highlight, celebrate, honor, acknowledge women founders, women business owners, women executives, just because we need to do that. So I've been able to do that in every place I've ever lived. And then while doing that, with a full-time career, whether that's been business development, operations, marketing, and PR. And since my time here in Salt Lake City, in the last few years, W Collective has gone through some interesting iterations. Yeah. But now we've moved more into a consultancy, if you will, advising women founders and women business owners. A couple of years ago, with Julia Deaver, we launched Utah's 40 Women Over 40. Mm-hmm. And I recently joined the family business, Universal Media. So we do all the advertising at like Class A lifestyle centers. So I tend to have my hands in a lot of different things all the time. I guess I have like a boredom, thing. I don't want to be bored. But yeah, that's just like a real like big picture and taking on, all the nuances of who I am and what I've been up to.
So why Utah? What brought you to Utah?
Okay, this is a good question. So my in-laws, and unfortunately, we lost my father-in-law a couple years ago to cancer. But they came across the Deer Valley area, Park City, Utah. This is now probably about 25 years ago. They're both avid skiers and just fell in love with it.
Yeah.
And so that's how Utah came into the picture. I've been with my husband, Todd Cohen, for 23 years now. And we've just started coming out here, skiing, Sundance, all of it, right? And after spending all these years, living in Los Angeles and New York City and Sao Paulo, Brazil, we came here after Brazil. And first thought was, do we go back to New York? Do we go back to Los Angeles? Where do we go?
Yeah.
Well, we're still here. And truth be told, just as we saw Brazil as an emerging market, everyone remembers the BRIC countries, right? Mm-hmm. Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Mm-hmm. We saw Utah, and let's just say the greater Salt Lake market, as an emerging market. Sure. Right? Emerging domestic market here. And that has also proven to be the case, right?
For sure.
So, and then everything else that comes with Utah, the landscape, the geography, the skiing, the hiking, the camping, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to leave Deer Valley once you get there.
Yeah.
It's probably the most beautiful place in the world.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you come here from Sao Paulo, and you've stayed here. How does Utah stack up against all of these other places as it relates to your work and what you do?
How honest do you want me to be?
Completely.
Clint? Okay. So first of all, I think that we can all say that our economy is incredible here, right? As the case, it is this emerging market. Not only have we looked at all the businesses that have been built here, right? That startup entrepreneurial tech business community. I think because I've been in that space everywhere I've ever lived, it's always just the most interesting and fun for me. I love the startup entrepreneur space. And so obviously our market compared to LA, San Francisco, New York, Sao Paulo is smaller, right? But it is quite mighty. Mm-hmm. And also the venture capital that's poured in here. So I look at it from that lens, right? That business, startup lens. And then I also look at it from another lens, which is that diversity, women's, overlooked communities lens. And I know that it's been as we've been documenting it, 8 years that Utah's been dead last for women's equality. And that has been very disheartening because it almost seems as though that maybe on the surface, as we all look at it, that shouldn't be the case. But then when we look at these surveys, okay, well, what are they measuring? Why that is the case? You're like, okay, there's work to be done.
What are they measuring?
So they're measuring representation of women in government.
Okay.
Representation of women, I believe, in the C-suite.
Okay.
The number of women that make 100,000 or over, I believe. And there's a few other factors. And so, as every year, we're getting ready for these surveys to come out, and you're thinking, okay, let us be 49. It's not the case. You have to kind of
That's awesome.
Let us be 45. I don't know,
We are state number 45.
That what?
We are this 45th state.
Right.
That'd be good.
That would be great. So it's frustrating because for me, we do have a lot of women's initiatives and, organizations, but because it's actually so specific, my thing is, well, why don't we just like every company open up their books and be like, okay, depending upon the level of that executive, let's put her at that 100,000 mark, right? Or the number of women in, let's say VP, senior VP, et cetera, right? Let's promote internally. From a government standpoint, I think we've had a couple of opportunities. And I know that that is a much more complex world, right? Politics in general. But it's just kind of like, what can we do so that maybe we're even creating that pipeline where we're really getting behind whoever it is or they are. So I've always found it very interesting. I ask myself, is it almost, because they say good PR and bad PR is great PR.
Mm-hmm.
No PR is right.
All PR is good.
Yeah. So is being 50 just keeps us in that PR, right? Like, oh gosh, well, there again, we're 50. Do you know what I mean? And so I have to kind of wonder, how much does it mean to all of us to actually do those concrete steps, right? Based on the data that they work with to make change. That's what I'm
Let's start with the business. Why do you think more women are in the C-suite?
Aren't?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. I think there's so many factors. It's so nuanced, right? Because as we know, even if you are a working woman, that 9 times out of 10, you have 2 to 3 jobs, right? You have your full-time job. If you have children, you're a mother, and then you tend to run that household, right? To a certain degree, right? So that could be one factor, just in the sense that we are carrying a large load. And even honestly, whether or not you have children, right? I want to acknowledge that, like, we just tend to carry a heavier load. I also look at it as that we don't necessarily, and when I say we don't, companies, I don't think put certain things in place to support women, right? Childcare, or we tend to need a more flexible schedule, right? Our maternity leave in this country can be questionable. So for example, in Canada, where I'm originally from, I believe their maternity leave is 12 months. I believe the first 6 months is fully paid for. And then the next 6 months, I want to say, is 50% of your salary. And then men have optional paternity leave for 6 months. Well,
is that paid for by the government or the company?
Could be a mix of both.
Okay. We
do have higher taxes in Canada.
Yeah.
But it allows for that, right?
Yeah.
So I would have to fact check. So I want to say it could be a mix of both the company and the government. But what I believe that allows women to do and families to do is to be able to maybe have the flexibility to put more into your work so that, that you can kind of move up those ranks. I mean, the other thing too is, what are companies doing to work on that internal promotion pipeline as well? I mean, we know based on like Lean In, McKinsey and Company, they always do another different type of survey each year where they look at the percentage of women that drop out, right? Because they'd like to start families, and then what that looks like in terms of bringing them back. I don't think we do the greatest job here. Yeah. Even my time in Brazil, I believe that their maternity leave is 6 months, I believe, fully paid. And there is a role waiting for you, whether it's the role that you left, right? Or something else in the company, but it's built that way, right? So that that you've got a position when you come back. So that's huge. So I think it's obviously a really complex thing in terms of what we need to do as a society to better support women for those that would like to move up the ladder successfully.
Yeah. Now, why do you think it doesn't happen in government in the state of Utah? I'm going to ask you some hard questions.
I know. I'm ready. I'm ready for them, Clint. That's an excellent question, because I feel like I can only answer as an outsider looking in,
Sure. Well, that perspective is what we need.
Yeah. So, and I think that it would be interesting to even just like get actual perspective from women that do hold positions in our government here, to almost kind of ask them like, what do you see? What is your experience?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think, it'd be really interesting to get more of that internal perspective.
Sure.
I remember when Becky Edwards was running, and that was very exciting. I mean, the momentum behind her was actually really cool.
She ran against Mike Lee.
Yes.
And then she ran another race, right?
I believe so.
I can't remember who she ran against in that one.
And I can't remember that as well. Yeah. Now that was a tough fight.
Yeah.
But I do think that the momentum behind her was really awesome. If we threw like everything behind her, would she have still won? I don't know. But what I will say is when things were moving closer, right? And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think like Ali Issam was running at the same time, and then
Ali was
dropped out.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, I would have liked to see her get behind Becky, all her people, like all her supporters, and push that as far as it could go. That would have been cool to see, because I think there would have been even more momentum. Now, again, would she have won? No, that was a hard fight, but I think it would have sent a signal, right? To just, our state to be like, okay, there's something happening here. What else can we do with this? Or who else can we put in place so that, again, it's about kind of almost like building that pipeline, right? And then what are the resources, the people, right, that we have got to throw behind that to make it happen? So I think like all of it is possible, but it has to be done with serious intention.
Well, do you think like a woman who had Mike Lee's exact political views and, viewpoints and record and all that type of stuff, I think that person could win.
I agree.
Like to me, it's like, yes, Becky lost and Ali lost, but they're going up against a sitting senator.
Yeah.
And they were going from not just like, hey, I'm a woman, he's a man. Like they're going from like a more liberal version of republicanism than, what Mike Lee does. Right.
And I think, is there that possibility where you position yourself maybe like center-ish right? You know what I mean? Where maybe you're not taking on all of those same opinions and policies, but some of them, elements of them. But the point is I think it's a matter of just creating that pipeline, and putting the necessary resources and people and supporters and whatnot in place. And to also maybe, change some hearts and minds. Even if it's through education of like, well, why are we choosing this position? Let me educate you on it.
Yeah.
You might still disagree with it. I think that, in the world of social media, that's a whole other conversation. I think it has taken away our ability to just see a different point of view and be able to be open to learning about that, even if we still disagree with it.
Well, I don't want to get too lost in the political stuff, but to me, it's interesting that because I think Becky Edwards was kind of running like as a conservative or moderate Democrat in a Republican primary, right? Ali was probably a little bit more conservative, but kind of like the same kind of like wing. What I find interesting is like we do have another party here, and they kind of just abdicate their responsibility in that role, right? Like when Mike Lee won that primary, the Democrats ran no one against him.
Right.
Isn't that like the state Democratic Party ran nobody against him, and they ran another, like he's basically a Democrat, Evan McMullen, but they can say he's an independent, and they put all their support behind that, and that's just like the only reason why I bring this up, you brought up like you got to convince and you got to like change hearts and minds. It's hard to do that
Yes.
when you're just like giving up.
Yeah.
You know, like we're not running anybody. We're going to run Evan McMullen. It's like, what?
Yeah.
That's very odd.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, like, I don't know that she wins or not, but I wonder, like, what it would have looked like had Becky run on the Democratic side. Right. We have this really interesting thing where you have to, and maybe you do. I mean, what do I know? I don't know anything. And I've never been a political party in my life. I've never gone to a rally. I've never donated to a candidate.
Right.
So I'm very like limited in my experience. So this is just me as like a lifelong Utah.
Yes.
It seems to me that we don't have a Democratic Party in the state of Utah, and we don't have, and probably more relevant is we don't have an opposition party in the state of Utah, and it makes it really hard, I think, for that group to get too worked up if they're not going to play.
I think it's a great.
I don't know if I just said that the right way, but they don't play.
It's a valid point. It's a valid point. Absolutely. But I think, like taking it full circle, it's like, okay, what can we do, in order to, and it's almost even less about like, okay, from 50 to 40, like it's less about that. It's more about, okay. And we've talked about this for a while. Mm-hmm. There's like a group of us for, gosh, I don't know how many years now, where we talk about the polarization of Utah, right? Mm-hmm. It's like on one hand, we've got this incredible economy, right? Like, our GDP, our unemployment, like all of this, right, puts us in the top 5 like best states right now, pretty good. Right? And then we've got this polar opposite side in terms of what does that look like, for women, representation of women, like in all industries. What does it look like for overlooked communities? And we're way over here. I'm just kind of like, what can we do with this to kind of make it so that it supports this? That's kind of my thing, right? And I think it is possible. I mean, imagine being like, hey, so, Utah, red state, conservative, very strong, community here, right? And all of that, but they have somehow figured out how to support women and that to me is the PR that I want to see.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it does turn into a political discussion because DEI has become a political discussion. I mean, we're seeing it at the presidential. This DEI is being talked about every day in our current presidential campaign. Like and it really has become a political topic. It's like even the way you just said that, like it's like, hey, we're a red state, but we could support women, which kind of implies like red states don't support women. Right? Well, right, like, and so, which great. Again, like, I'm not a political person, but it is interesting, and I think probably part of the reason why this might be more of a challenge now than it was like 6 years ago. So I remember like 6-7 years ago when I first heard DEI, it wasn't like a political thing. It wasn't like a lightning rod, right? And now it most certainly is. Yeah. Right? In particular, the E. Yeah. The E part of it. I think the E part, I think has become probably the most political. D and I think everybody kind of agrees with. Yeah. But why do you think that is? Like, why do you think it's become so political? And why don't you just change the definition of equity? Like the equity thing, I think, is really what is holding people back.
I just look at it as someone that was born and raised in Canada. Mm-hmm. We're super diverse, right? Mm-hmm. And then in every city I've ever lived, New York, right? Los Angeles, San Francisco. I mean,
those are super,
they're Toronto, all melting pots, right? They're all melting pots, super diverse. Yeah. And so for me, it's almost like it's just about representation. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't any city, state, company, county, why wouldn't you want representation? Mm-hmm. Right. And what does that mean? I mean, and this is kind of part of like our whole over 40, right? It's about and obviously it's focused on women, but I'm just going to take that piece where it's like, it is about representation. It's about representation of age, ethnicity, industry, opinion, thought. I mean, so I wish that we would just not look at it as like, because now it's like, oh, DEI and woke. And I'm like, oh, what are we doing here? Why can't we just look at it as representation of everybody, of all industry, business? That's
why do you think it's not though? Like I've never gotten like as I've looked at this and talked to leaders like yourself. And again, like I started out this conversation, like you are an incredible leader in this state and we're so lucky to have you. Why do you think that's true? Like, why can't you just talk about a representation?
I think that some people actually don't want representation. I mean, I think that you could really just go out there and be like, you know what? No, I would rather just see certain gender and certain ethnicity as like the leaders. And I'm like, okay, that's great. I think other people might be scared, really fearful of what proper representation might be, because then they feel, well, will I be left out? Right?
Yeah.
If we're going to promote or support or whatever, elect, like whatever word you want to use, then this group over here might think, well, then what happens to me?
Yeah.
And so
for sure, right? Like it's human nature.
Yes. And so I think that if we positioned it as, well, representation means you and bringing you, your group, your thoughts, along with all of this other stuff, we don't want to leave you behind.
Yeah.
We don't want to include, it's not about not including you, but I think it matters for current generations, future generations. How many times do we hear about, especially fathers saying, hey, I want to make sure that my daughter has a future, right? Or that you are of a specific ethnicity and you want to make sure that your group, your culture, even your religion, that your next generation of, children have opportunity. Like what? That's the thing that kind of bothers me. It's like, well, why wouldn't you want that? Especially knowing that the opportunity that has, let's say, maybe existed for certain groups, why wouldn't you want to pass that along, share the wealth in a way? So that's kind of how I look at it. I think it is that some people just want to dig their heels into the ground and be like, nope, I don't think we need to change anything. Great. I think it's other people being genuinely fearful of what that means for them and maybe their group, their community. And I get that. But that's when like education comes in, and just more information to maybe help them understand what that means for all of us. Like even when we talk about women, right? And women's equality and equal pay and all of that, right? It's not about taking pay away to give it over here. It's just that, right? It's why don't we just make sure that it is balanced, forget about maybe even equal, balanced pay for that same role. We don't want to take away what you are already making, right? And we know, listen, companies that are doing well, this doesn't apply to everyone, but companies that are doing well, that they have the funds too, right?
Sure.
So that's in my mind is that it's part fear. It's part that like, nope, this is just what I believe and I don't want change, and that's fine. But yeah, I feel like if we just talked about it more as proper representation, I think people would feel less like negatively passionate. They would actually be like, oh, okay, that makes sense for me.
Yeah. And you said a word there that I think is important, which is opportunity. Like equal access to opportunity. I don't know anyone. Like that's 95, 98, 99% of the country has to be on board with equal access to opportunity. Again, not to, belabor this point, but many see equity as equal outcomes. And that's where they start being like, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I don't know if I agree with that. Like, I probably don't.
Yeah. Well,
right?
the whole quota thing.
Yeah. That thing, that sounds like a whole different, that sounds like the opposite of meritocracy and freedom and like a million different things. Right.
Yeah.
Which, whatever. And so again, like, I just think if there was a way to focus on the opportunity piece and equal access to opportunity, my word, who doesn't agree with that?
Well, and here's the thing. So, and this is also another discussion, right? Because then what happens is that DEI leads into this whole quota thing. And I get it, right? It's like, you don't want to just create even representate, right? Diversity, representation. You don't want to create that for the sake of it.
Right.
You actually want to put things in place, where you're creating that opportunity. If that makes sense, right? So that you can create that representation in government, right? In cities, in companies. And the one part that I will say is, as it pertains to maybe board of directors, like, those kinds of roles, I think there is something to be said about companies going out of their way to make that more diverse and just creating more of that representation. And I think that, and again, I hate the word quota, but I do think that there is a solid argument there that, you want to go out of your way to maybe create that board of directors where there is better representation. I actually think that that's valid.
And NASDAQ actually has created quotas around that. Like, you have to have a certain amount of certain makeup of your board in order to go public on NASDAQ.
Yes. So I think
I don't know if that's the same with the New York Stock Exchange.
Yeah, exactly. So I think for that, I think companies should go way out of the way to make sure that they are creating a board that has proper representation, because it actually is super beneficial for that company. But in terms of just those general, roles, titles, and positions at companies, I think that, yes, you want to make sure that in the interview process, you are maybe going out of your way to intentionally create representation there. But of course, you want to hire the best, no matter what that looks like.
Yeah. So I grew up in Spanish Fork, Utah, like 10 minutes from here.
Yes.
Right. And there was and like I still go to the same barbershop sometimes, all this type of stuff. And when I would go in there and I'd listen to kind of like their perspectives on things, right? Which is like, hey, we don't want growth. We don't probably, they wouldn't even want electricity, right? Like, they would want, like, let's go back to like horses and stuff, which it sounds beautiful to me again, but like, but then there's these things. Like, I remember there was somebody who tweeted out somebody prominent in our community said like, hey, we have like 65% of the state is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yes.
And that's too much, and we need to change that.
Okay.
So my people, I say my people, like the people at that barbershop in Spanish Fork hear that. And they're like, well, that's why we fled Missouri and, all these other places, because like, how do you actually do that? Right. That's where I think like, maybe that sounds good. Like, hey, we shouldn't have 65% of the population be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But do that with any other religion anywhere else. Go do that in Israel and see what happens. Well, you're seeing it. Right?
Yes.
So like, what does that actually mean? Right. I think those things can be easily like thrown out where like, hey, we have too much of X, whatever it is.
Sure.
So how are you going to change that?
Right.
That's where the people at the barbershop in Spanish Fork, Utah are going to be like, that sounds like you're getting rid of. And how do you do that? And what do you do? And what does that mean? You're going to relocate those people. You're going to who, you know what I mean? And then it becomes like this really interesting. And that is the piece I think that again, like I think 99% of us who agree with equal opportunity kind of miss in the way we express ourselves and the way we use language.
Yeah.
If you say 65, by the way, I don't know if that's the exact number, but it's like 65% of the population is a member of this church, and it should be less than that. You've lost already. Like that's kind of it. That's kind of your contribution to the conversation. And then unless you take that back or apologize, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of like, what do you mean by that? Because that could mean very intense and really, really, really bad things.
Sure. I mean, the reality is that Utah was settled by that 65% of that community, right?
Yeah.
It's part of the history. And I think on one side, it does make for a very, interesting and unique culture and community, right?
Sure, yeah.
Just as people go to Israel, right? The Wailing Wall and what that history means for those religions, right? Or you go to like the pyramids of Giza and what that means, historically in this world, and what that dominant religion was at that time, right? So it's kind of like what we have here in a way, and so it's just part of the history.
Yeah.
That is who settled here. And obviously over the years, more diverse people, thought, religions, community, groups have come here for various different reasons.
Because it's the most beautiful state in the world.
It pretty much is. And I've lived in a few spots, so I can attest to that. I think where things become more complex is what that percentage means for thought and opinion, experience. I mean, all of that comes with it, right?
Yeah.
I think that unless it's about intention. If you intentionally say, hey, you know what? I want to gain more unique, diverse experience and skill. I think that it is to your benefit that maybe you go and you work in New York or LA, Los Angeles, Boston. I mean, you name any of those really large, cities, to gain some experience, perspective, skill, learn about like that particular culture, right? And then you bring that back. Well, regardless of the fact that you are going to still be 65% of that community, but your opinion and your thought and your perspective changes. And then what that brings back to this community, I think helps to create the representation that is needed. And so I want to be really thoughtful in how I'm explaining this, because it's not necessarily about saying, well, no, we want to diminish, right? That 60 to 40.
I know you don't mean that. But I think we got to be like careful. The language can be so on both sides, obviously, like pretty like direct, and like we can kind of just well,
it's this or this.
Yeah, it's like, and so you can't like really have this nuanced conversation.
Yeah.
And again, if you're sitting in a barbershop in Spanish Fork, Utah, and they hear 65% is too high, it's not going to go over well, right? It's like sitting in that barber shop and like I was like, yeah, Mitt Romney can't be reelected. You know what I mean? Like this is like this is what this state is, like it or not. Like this is and so how do you reach those people and communicate with those people and make them part of what's happening?
Yeah,
and not feel like you're and again, you don't do this. You are an incredible leader in this respect, but I do think there sometimes it can just like be unintentionally divisive. Oh, does that make sense?
Absolutely. Which again, that's why I say, and I'll say this: when you meet someone who is a part of that community, but they have lived, they were born and raised right in another city state, then they come here. Even they have a vastly different.
Absolutely.
Okay. So
no question.
Right. So, and that to me is actually fascinating, it's been fascinating for me because you can't, I mean, you want to talk about like an outsider, like here I am.
Yeah.
You know, that's been really fascinating for me, right? So that's why I'm saying it's not about diminishing that percentage.
Yes.
It's about taking that percentage and saying, we just want you to have a much more open, colorful, just different experiences, different perspective, right? Because then you yourself, I think, will not only have an interesting perspective of your place, but then I feel that you'll have a vastly different perspective of the people around you that are not a part of that community. And then it's also kind of like taking that and saying, great, then what can we do so that there isn't this dominant thought, thought process or opinion on things, right? That we can open that up a bit. That's kind of how I see it, right? Because, and you ask most people that know me, you know, I like to embrace it all. I mean, I want to embrace and learn from and meet, I mean, everybody. I want to understand where you come from. You know, I want to understand it all. So I don't like that attitude of, you know, well, we got to, you know, diminish it. No, it's just more like, hey, how can we be more allies?
Yes.
That, you know
really
what I mean?
just made a great case for the particular dominant religion in this state for why they go on missions. Like that was what you just said was like growing up, what I heard as the number one reason to go on a mission, which is to go get different perspective in the world, and that is like a pretty beautiful piece of that religion.
But I'm going to jump in.
No, yeah, please. Yeah.
And I'm going to say,
please.
That is also, I mean, when you hear how many languages do we speak here? Like 180 because of that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I find it fascinating. Like everyone that I've met, right? Especially when they hear that I live in Brazil and they're like, oh yeah, I did my mission, you know, wherever, right? And then they can, you know, speak Portuguese. And I'm like, man, your Portuguese is way better than mine, right? Yeah. But so what they get from that, but I still do believe that you are enclosed.
Well, you're on a mission.
Right. So like you're enclosed. So yes, you're learning about the religion, the culture, so that you have that understanding, but then that also makes you more successful on your mission.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is still being very enclosed, right? With those same thoughts and experiences and whatnot, right? So this is what I said to someone. I said, okay, this is what should happen. You come back from your mission and then you go and you have like either, you know, a paid or unpaid internship in maybe a domestic city, right? And I've mentioned some, you know, Chicago, whatever large, you know, city that you can name, do a 6-month internship where you literally have to fend for yourself. No one's going to help you find an apartment or find a job or anything. And you have to fend for yourself, right? In that city and community, then come back. Yeah. And so that is.
Well, then come back and you never leave. Which is an interesting.
Right. But that's the thing. I think like that's what we need to encourage is. Because yes, you get that part of going to a different city and country and culture and being immersed in that as much as possible in order to have a successful mission, but it still keeps you in a bubble. So what can we do to kind of break that bubble open, right? Where it's like, okay, you've had this experience now we need you to have this side of the experience. Then you bring all of that back and you apply it to our community and our market here.
Yeah, don't be dogmatic.
Exactly.
Right? Like dogmatism is terrible.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know how we actually do that. That's a very like individual type of thing. Like some people just prefer to be dogmatic. You don't have to think as much, you know, like it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So I don't know like what government could do or what business leaders can do about that. I do think business leaders can set examples and talk about the importance of that.
Well, here's the thing. So recently, my friend was here with her son and his friends, and they are considering going to BYU. But one of them talked to me about how he really wants to do their work from abroad program. So it's those kinds of things, right? So it's like, what could a university, like an educational institution, what could companies do? Because if you take Adobe, for example, which is such a great example, right? Maybe you do a work from abroad program, right? Where you get to work in wherever they have an office for 6 months and then come back. I mean, God, that would be such a brilliant experience.
Yeah. No question. How cool is that? But then you've got to work at Adobe.
Right. And that's just one. That's just
one. And by the way, I love Adobe, and they're here because Josh James sold Omniture.
Yes.
He's great, all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But another interesting thing that I wonder what you think of this.
Yeah.
Is we seem to be very entrepreneurial in this state, which means we produce a lot of companies, but they're usually quite small. Right? Like Qualtrics is an enormous company.
I was just going to say, like, Qualtrics actually like blows that apart. But
it's an enormous company for us, but it's only 5,000 employees.
Yeah.
It's not Adobe.
Yeah.
Right? Like who actually is headquartered here. But you know what I mean? Like Qualtrics is like an enormous company for us. But it's not Facebook. It's not Google. It's not like some of these, like all these other things. It's like 5,000 people. It's not the biggest employer in the state, not even close. That's probably IHC or the state itself.
Yeah.
Or these types of things. We tend to, and what I mean by that, in particular, like women have such incredible companies here in the state of Utah, and they're like consumer based, like
e-commerce
and things like we seem to be so incredible about that, but they probably have like 8 employees. And so then like, what do you do? Like, you know what I mean? There is like this other interesting balance because we're so entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And we love to be entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
We're very much a startup state. I think the governor's right in branding us that like startups can't really do what we just described, right? Like Adobe can do, Google can do it, Amazon could do it, Salesforce could do it. We don't build those types of companies here. So what do we do about that?
That's interesting. It is an interesting, point to think about that, right? It's like, why, let's say if a company starts in New York, right? Or San Francisco, like name those bigger markets, what is it about that market, that community? What are they doing to really be able to take a startup and then just like blow it up, right? Like it is an interesting point to kind of like, noodle on for a second. I mean, one thing that I think that I would like to see is, so I'm just going to take an example.
Oh, yeah, please.
So, Bumble, gosh, why I'm having one of those moments where I'm forgetting her name.
Whitney.
Yes, thank you. So you know that she's originally from here.
Oh yeah, of course.
And so now granted, she didn't start it here, but it's just taking someone that's like originally from here. And then they said to themselves, well, hey, I'm going to go and work, in this market. Right. And then was able to, found Bumble and like, look where that is right now. Now it's like public and all that. Yeah. So I wonder, like, what can we learn from Whitney? Yeah. Right. Who, born and raised here. I believe that she's like in Texas is where she lives full time, but still it's like almost like what were her experiences here? Right. Yeah. And that's something to be said. Like maybe she left and I think, she was like in the Bay Area, but like, how could we bring someone like that back?
Yeah.
To take her as an example as like a pretty prolific female entrepreneur and what she's been able to build.
Incredible.
Right. And maybe learn from that.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting.
And also plug, I think you guys should have her as a keynote speaker.
Her husband spoke last year. We ask her every year. I promise you there's no lacking in trying. And we'll ask her again. And there was one time where she committed and she actually had to back out.
Shoot. Okay.
So for sure, we ask her every year.
Yeah.
And so we'd love to have her.
Yeah.
The other piece of that, which is interesting, is we just don't build those types of companies. And that is another aspect of that I don't think gets heard enough. Like we've never built anything like that and produced. But if you were going to build a software as a service company, as a female entrepreneur, there's probably not a better place than Utah. If you're going to build a consumer app company,
that's a good point.
There's probably not a better place than Silicon Valley. Like we don't build those types. And by the way, what I would love, my solution to that problem is like, let's build those types of companies and let's create the network and the funding and the mentors to be able to do that type of stuff. But we just don't build those types of companies here.
Yeah. Well, and maybe this is something else. And again, that's
what would make her more unique than anything is like that if she had done that in Utah, that she did it here. That would be crazy.
Oh yeah. That would be amazing.
Like with no expertise in this community or funding. Like I don't think a VC funds that in the state of Utah. Right.
Yeah.
Like they fund SaaS companies that already have revenue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. We are hyper SaaS focused,
which is not good. Not good. I don't think it's good at all.
Yeah, I think we have to again representation, right?
Yeah, it's not good,
right? I think that we have to maybe, and that's the thing, right? It's like, then are we slightly risk averse in our investment thesis here? Right? Are we not willing to maybe go out on a limb and maybe diversify what we're investing in and throw everything at it to blow it up to maybe, the level of a Facebook? I don't know.
That's
I don't
what Silicon Valley does so great.
They do. But then you have to ask yourself, right? Okay. So Silicon Valley, right? The Mecca of Mecca, right? For startups and entrepreneurship.
Used to be, maybe not anymore, but certainly is.
It's still.
Yeah, probably still.
It's still
particularly
up there.
With AI.
Yeah.
Particularly with AI.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said about the schools that are in that area.
Hard to beat Stanford.
Kind of. Just the ecosystem in and of itself, right? Like the talent, the money, the schools, the VC. So
everything.
It's everything all together. It's even like, think about the accelerators, Y Combinator, 500 startup. Do you know what I mean? They have built an incredible ecosystem, which is why they are Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah.
And the question is, do we really want to like go head to head with that? I don't know. But do we want to maybe just continue to build our ecosystem so that it's just a little bit more competitive in the general space of startups, entrepreneurship, and VC? Yeah, I think that's a great goal, to have. I know that like some people are like, oh, we want to become the next Silicon Valley. Well, okay, again, lofty goal, but is that our goal, or do we just want to continue to really build a solid of enough ecosystem here, right? Where startups can grow, beyond like their walls.
Yeah.
So that there is a little bit more of a competitive advantage there. Yes, I think we could safely say that, right? Because, Texas, right? Think of Austin, right? Think of all those like tier 2 markets that are now bubbling up to the surface, right? What are they doing that we can learn from, right? Because it's one thing to learn from the ecosystem that Silicon Valley has built, right?
Yeah.
And we should absolutely be learning from them. But now you've got these tier 2, and we're tier 2 as well, right?
Yeah. We're more like Austin than Silicon Valley.
Exactly.
Sure.
But I think Austin, they're really blowing up, even Denver. So you have to ask yourself, what is happening there that continues to make them a really strong tier 2 market that is kind of like pushing our boundaries a little bit, right? What can we learn? Because that's who we should be learning from so that we are then in that same kind of competitive advantages as they are. Because I don't think it's about competing with Silicon Valley.
Well,
you know what I mean?
It would be pointless to do that because if you want to work in Silicon Valley, go work in Silicon Valley. Like we're obviously like a different state with different ethos and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Austin and Denver in particular are really great at recruiting outside companies, like really, really great at that. Right. and they get new headquarters and all this type of stuff. Like we don't really do. That's another thing we don't really do. Like I think we're better than them at starting companies.
Yeah.
But we're not better at than them at recruiting, the top companies in the world. I mean, Tesla, everybody's moving there, right? Like,
I know,
but they didn't start there.
That's right.
Which is an interesting piece.
One thing that maybe some people might not know. So I ran the Impact Hub for a couple of years. I would say it was probably our second co-working space here. The first one was Work Hive.
Impact Hub. I loved Impact Hub.
I don't know. I haven't been there in a minute. I'm not sure. This was 2017 and 2018. And, if I could say so myself, we had a good time. Like Absolutely. You want to talk about hustling, and we won like best, office space. We were at I want to say 100% capacity for almost 12 months straight. We did some things. We had Slack as an exclusive sponsorship there for a couple of months. We were cranking.
Impact Hub was, when you were running it, it was awesome.
It was awesome. It was incredibly hard work. But I also had a good time doing it. Many a sleepless night, tears and heart palpitations, but we still had fun. But one of the things that I remember, and Jeff Erickson can attest to this, was when I met the guys from Carta. And this is before they even named themselves Carta. It was called eShares. Mm-hmm. And they were looking to expand here. And they got turned away by every co-working space. Now, they were working with one of the major commercial real estate companies here just to see kind of where were they going to set up shop, right? And at that time, you can imagine, right? Bay Area. Well, what's blowing up? WeWork. Mm-hmm. So they were like, well, where's the WeWork here, right? Mm-hmm. And I think because the co-working spaces that we did have here at the time, I just don't think that they had the capacity to house them. But when I met them and I was like, wait, you guys are from Silicon Valley and you want to set up shop here? I was like, this is great, right?
Yeah.
And everyone that was at the Impact of the time will tell you that they thought I was crazy. But I was so excited for the opportunity to be part of bringing a company like that here. And I think their initial team was about 25 people, and we housed them on the third floor. They grew to about 60 or more people. We had Carta folk everywhere around our internet would
that's awesome.
Drop. It was crazy, but it was awesome. And then they eventually got their, spot right across from the Salt Lake Convention Center, But I want to say we need to do that more, mm-hmm. right? And people are just kind of like, oh, we don't want more of California, coming here. And I would argue you do.
Yeah.
I would argue that, whether it's California, wherever they're coming from, I would argue that you do, because that is part of creating the ecosystem.
Yeah. You don't want to be a closed off ecosystem. You want to be a welcoming ecosystem.
And again, it's let's be open-minded. What can we learn from them? And we should be flattered that they're looking at this market to expand, right? Absolutely. Why was Carta expanding here? Because they knew that BYU had an incredible accounting program, right? Mm-hmm. So they wanted to pull folks from that. Everybody knows that this is a sales state, right? Yeah. Why, right? Mm-hmm. Because due to that 65% of the community, right? And because of the fact that they go on these missions, we have brilliant salespeople here. They wanted to tap into that, right? So I think it's looking at it from that standpoint where it's what can we do to create a stronger ecosystem here so that we're building more prolific startups?
Yeah, I love it. Robyn, so great to see you.
Same
Seriously,
here.
What an honor to have you. How should people get in touch? What are you working on right now? What should we promote?
Okay. So right now, with Universal Media, I'm just going to give a little quick background there, if that's okay. So my father-in-law pioneered shopping mall advertising 40 years ago. His first business called Mall Communications Network, he built it to a portfolio of 450 properties and sold it to Clear Channel 25 years ago.
Wow.
Got back in the business about 12 years ago, which is now Universal Media. And we have a boutique portfolio of properties. So here in the Salt Lake market, think of Mountain View Village, which is our newest property, City Creek, the Gateway, Station Park. We have media assets that we deploy in these environments as an advertising network. So that is the main gig right now. And, we're talking to, several different big advertisers right now. And we work with all the different, agencies, both here and regionally. But yeah, I mean, we've done campaigns with Weber State, right? We've done campaigns with Graystar, so that's what we do. With 40 over 40. Our third gala is coming up on September 27th.
Where's that going to be?
Grand America.
Great.
Which is also super unique here. And it's a special place, right?
America.
Don't we all?
I love it.
I mean, whoever envisioned that with even Little America across the street, but it's such a stunning hotel. And they have it down pat, right? So, September 27th, luncheon gala, to honor and recognize 40 more women over people 40. And we are looking for a couple more table sponsorships. So if anyone is interested, Utah40over40.com. To learn more about Universal Media, universalmediaus.com. And like I said, W Collective, we really are kind of more supporting women founders and business owners more from a one-to-one consulting basis right now, working on revamping that website and just revamping and repositioning it, a little bit. But I'm always happy to work with women founders and women business owners and founders in general, because we all know that the entrepreneurship journey is a very challenging and very lonely journey. I've been watching my husband do it for many years. And I just like to know that someone knows that they have an advisor, a mentor, someone that can maybe help them be introduced to potential fundraising. Partnerships, whatever that looks like. So that's kind of what I've been doing as my moonlighting side hustle.
Robyn, thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's been great to be here.
Likewise.